and welcome. This is Joyce Edison. I want to welcome you to another session on our Wellness at Work Forum. And today my guest is Elizabeth Barchard. And Elizabeth, you're coming to us from London, England. What's the weather like out there today?
Oh, yeah. Well, the sun is trying to peek through, but we've had a few cold days with some snow flurries around, but hopeful that the spring temperatures will perk up a bit.
I think we're hoping for the same thing here in Central Canada. we did. Every once in a while, you see the snowflakes and you're like, it's not done yet. Like the kids, right, on a road trip. It's not done yet. No, but today I really appreciate you joining us. So Elizabeth, tell me a little bit about you and the work that you do.
Yeah, so I'm a healthcare design strategist. I consult with organizational leaders to design environments and systems that promote health and well-being. I've been in the industry for nearly 2 decades and have navigated the corporate worlds, nonprofits, and really now working globally with colleagues like yourself to tackle this large, momentous avenue of workplace wellness.
What makes you passionate about this work?
So my passion derives primarily from seeing lived experience and experiencing it myself throughout my childhood. And what came about for me is realizing that we all grow up in different environments. We have different access to different health opportunities and wellness opportunities, and that really our environments shape how we experience and thrive and grow in this world. So, I went from a very white, suburban, wealthy suburb of the San Francisco Bay Area, where I started my work as a trainer there, to working in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, which is largely lower socioeconomic, marginalized communities, all coming together for the same reason, and that was to engage in their health. And I just saw how the different access points really shaped people's involvement with their own health and how the community responded as well.
So when you look at the differences between someone or group or community from a marginalized community versus a wealthy community, what are some key differences that you've observed?
Well, I mean, access comes to mind primarily, and I think it looks different for different populations. And with abundance, there's opportunity to engage. Now, the choices might be the same in terms of how we get there and what paths we take and how much ownership we take over our own well-being. But for instance, I advised for an acupuncture clinic in New York City, and what they're trying to do is make Chinese medicine more accessible to the community. And these are non-traditional forms of medicine. And so in a wealthier population, you see that as almost a mainstream service. In marginalized communities, there is an education point, but there's also this knowledge that when we're brought up in these environments that are marginalized, that may have experienced more stress or trauma, that those decisions may not be as linear, it may not be as available and largely accessible in forms of not just monetary, but availability. What is our social class doing? How are they engaging? What foods are they eating? And so we are driven by our social norms, and those are the biggest differences I see.
Wow. So your background has really positioned you to consult with organizational leaders and in that whole area of health inequities. What are some key things that you would like to share with our listeners today?
Yeah, so there's a few key things. One I would say is that equity is not linear. So, we view interventions and we view health initiatives in terms of success and failures, and that just doesn't happen with health equity. We need to see the idea that we're moving through progress, and we have to measure effectiveness over time. And it's a lifelong journey. So that's one thing. The patience and empathy required to listen to voices unheard is so powerful, and we need to leverage that storytelling experience, especially as it relates to trauma, as it relates to systemic racism as trauma. These are very powerful avenues that we can garner so much empathy, which boosts our capacity for care. So that's one thing. And then, like I said, healing is a process. And so if we can elevate the human experience, so we understand where people are coming from, and largely we see that, especially in workplace wellness, that we oversolve for the average member, or the average employee, the average customer. And what we're missing is an opportunity to really dig deep into the root causes of these health issues and solve for the people that have the highest need and are at the highest risk and actually incur the highest costs.
Yeah. So in terms of workplace wellness, what would a leader need to think about in terms of health equities?
So I follow a methodology called behavioral design. It's an incredible intervention that looks at the interplay of our environments and how we think, feel, and how we behave. And there's a large miss in workplace wellness, I think, around this. And I mentioned it briefly with over-designing for the average member, but we have this amplified struggle for identity, for truth, and culture when it comes to wellness. And using behavioral design, we have the opportunity to nudge for good. So we're looking at things that are initial behaviors to engage, including information, which tends to be information overload sometimes. And so that prevents us from making choices a lot of the time. But that we actually also, there's interventions available that are lower cost. So we're not trying to spend a lot of money, but we're designing an experience that allows people to engage with their health and reduces the barriers for that to happen. Alongside with that is amplifying the benefits. And these tend to be, they need to be switched on to a more emotional experience instead of more functional. And that's where we're going to see the most change.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm a person who have no clue of behavioral design, what are some things that you could say to the viewers who heard that word for the first time, so that they could get context of really what are the elements of behavioral design and where would they see it show up in their workplace, and how could they, because some of our viewers are the people who are themselves advocating for workplace wellness in their organization. How could they make the case for that to be something that their organization look into?
Beautiful. Yeah. So ultimately, this is about the environment influencing our decision making. And that plays a large role. The context impacts our behavior so greatly. And when we look at how we can do this, it often is about specific behaviors. And I want to emphasize that it's looking at the behavior and not the outcome. So if you're designing something, let's say that you have a health plan that your employee has to sign up for. And now this is particularly in the United States. I live in London, so there's socialized medicine. I know that in Canada as well. But if there's a decision to make around which health plan to take, there's a very good case to say that we can design the default that is in the best interest for the employee, not the provider and not the healthcare plan, when there's a whole lot of friction there with maximizing profits. But looking at the data of our populations, disaggregating the data to look at the highest needs and encouraging people with less choice. And I know that it's counterintuitive, but that's a big part of behavioral design, is to say, we do need to help people make decisions, but we also have to give them the right environment to do that. So that's one example that has a large impact on how people engage with their health. The other more maybe subtle nuances is around if and when we get back into the office, what is available for us? Are there water stations that are close by so that we actually do have to get up from our desk, take a break, and go fill up our water? Is is food and other beverages at an eye level that is a grab and go, and are those healthier options? So in a way, we want to make those healthy options more available, very easily accessible, and within eyesight, because we tend to grab and reach and choose the first thing that we see. So the unhealthy options should be behind corners, under desks. It should be painful, actually, to choose unhealthy options. And that's a really specific way to encourage good behavior. And one more specific example is spaces. How do we make spaces more collaborative, where we offer the chance that people do have those encounters when it's safe, when it's all COVID safe, that we can encourage those types of environments, and also have the ability to incorporate movement into that. Do we have, my husband just let me know that they are doing they're rebuilding staircases in their building in the middle of the office. So not on the side where it's dark and gray and you have to, if you open the door, you might get locked out, but in the middle of the building. So we encourage those types of mobility, and of course, also accessibility for disabilities if needed. But those types of things are gentle and structural nudges for good behavior.
Those are very important. Give us an example of a project you worked on that you were most proud of in terms of the behavioral design.
So I've recently actually consulted with a health tech company that is offering a platform for HR departments to manage their employee wellness. And has a phenomenal user interface, and the UX appears very good. And when I dug a little bit deeper, what I understood was that the first thing was that there's really too much information to navigate. So when people are in crisis or need immediate attention, how fast can they find this? And is it actually also available for their family or support system to look through? Because these people in our support network, in our support bubbles now that we call them, they have a big impact on the health decisions that we make. So that was one thing that I encouraged them to do, is make information, maybe even a starter pack for people that are coming in that don't know where to start, but also if there is crisis, that they have immediate access to telemedicine, which is now hopefully here to stay in mainstream. The other piece around that was looking at basic things around inclusivity. So they had a directory of all employees, and they had a gender drop-down menu. Now, we know that this is becoming more of an accelerated issue amongst our communities, and we need to be more inclusive of what those options are. Very, very subtle changes, but what it does is it shows that they're paying attention, that they have availability for people to choose their identity. And I think that's a huge thing. Lastly, through that is understanding that the scope of the wellness world, when we talk about emotional, physical, mental health, and financial well-being, that those are buckets and those are pillars mainstream. But how do we get a little bit deeper into some of those root causes and use that to create insights for HR departments to make decisions in real time? So if the community is asking, or we see through the claims analysis that there's a need in a certain area, how are we bringing in relevant providers immediately to address those needs that we can serve our community well? Very proud of that project, because it's pushing the envelope and pushing past the status quo of just offering, which is great. We need to offer yoga classes and meditation and sleep information, but we need to grab the deeper issues and get people to think about how they got to that place even before those decisions are being made.
So true, because people behave differently in crisis than when they are normal, and having those access points are very, very key. for people. And everybody's in a hurry these days. People are busier than ever, although there is nowhere to go.
We're busier than ever, aren't we?
Busier than ever with nowhere to go. It's a very strange thing. So as a leader, as you know, we think our organization, we think our workplace. I know we did our building in 2015. We got it in and redid our entire building. And one of the things I was thinking about in there is the same structure, right? The flow. Our building was we only had windows on one side, and so how do we get light? How do we make it feel like there is light? And can we add windows in the internal offices? So all of those things are important for how people feel and think wellness and strategizing in ensuring that all the office doors lead towards the light, right? And that the flow of light is there. So I think those are so important. As you said, there are subtle changes, subtle things that we can do to create an environment of well-being. So that's key. But as a leader, what would get the leader to think more of wanting to do that? Let's talk about the ROI on that. What is the ROI on behavioral design for organizations versus, is there any research to show that those who think about those things versus those who don't, there is an advantage? What are some of the ROIs that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, the ROIs there's tangibles and intangibles. The tangibles that you see over time and that come through these interventions are better health outcomes. And when you have better health outcomes, you have higher productivity. To go to intangibles, you have people more connected to their work, to their purpose, to their values that are aligned with the company's values. And so we see this trickle down effect, and we can go and connect with our health providers and look at the trends over time and the data and the claims data to understand the financial gains. And it will inevitably come down to the bottom line of the company. But when we look at the intangibles, the holistically understanding this ROI, we've got people more connected. The work-life integration is about the whole person. There's they bring this inspiration and enthusiasm into their lives and their homes, into their communities. So navigating this individual, this collective responsibility to individual well-being comes right back to the community. And that's about keeping us safe. It's about keeping us healthy in mind, body, and spirit, and forcing the ROI to turn into this value on investment. We need both, and companies do need both. But when we create these designs, and I follow a wonderful company out of San Francisco Bay Area, Irrational Labs. They do a ton of work with large companies all over the world. And what they're getting people to do is just, start with small. Look at some specific behaviors that have a very large outcome that impacts everybody, including the bottom line. And that will start to trickle down into systems that allow for these things to happen over time. So it becomes part of how people do things, instead of, trying to do one thing and quitting, and trying to do nothing and quitting. When we incorporate this as a system, and we start to reduce barriers and friction for these things to happen, then the outcomes are exponential.
That is so true, because at the end, what you want to do is create a culture that's more inclusive, more accessible, so that people can have better outcomes. And if we can do that structurally and behaviorally, what are the benefits are huge. So who would be an ideal client for you? Who would be the kind of client who would use your services? So if our viewers are thinking, how do I make the case? What does that look like?
I like to work with courageous leaders that have health and well-being at the forefront of their priorities for their employees and or their community users. So I do tend to work with companies that service the community and that offer health and well-being services. But primarily, we have to take care of ourselves as employees to even extend that arm out to the community. So that would be my ideal company to work with. And again, courageous, committed to the long term. These are systems, these are processes, and not looking for quick fixes, willing to go a bit deeper.
Good. Thank you. So very well said. Very well said. It definitely is a commitment. We do need to be committed to wellness. You don't just get up and say, I'm healthy today and I'm going to stay healthy for the rest of my life without a commitment to the practice of wellness so that you can maintain your health. And I think it's the same with our workplaces. It's the same with our relationships. It's the same in life and in our community. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you think our listeners need to know about the work that you do?
Yes, I would like to finish off by saying one thing, and that is to watch what people do and not listen to what they say. And that's where we'll be able to design the best interventions. We want the lived experience and we want the stories, but we also need to look at how people behave.
Sure, because it tells us what to design. Absolutely. Thank you so much for today. I really appreciate you making time to share your expertise with us and give us that bit of knowledge, because most of us actually have no idea anything about behavioral design. And I think our listeners will really value that. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.